Hey guys, tonight we are going to turn over one of the darkest and most misunderstood pages of the Tudor dynasty. You've heard of Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of King Henry VIII, haven't you? History books often paint the picture of an impulsive, foolish young girl, a queen who cuckolded the king and paved her own way to the scaffold. But what if I told you? Most of what you know about her is a lie. This is not a simple story of brazen adultery. This is a much darker tale, one of a teenage girl who was manipulated, abused, and had the truth of her situation buried beneath a wrongful death sentence. For centuries, official history has used the word adultery to conceal a tragedy of silence, control, and powerful men who preyed on children. If you think Catherine Howard was just someone to blame for playing with fire, then join me as we uncover the erased evidence and the distorted details. The real truth behind that historical curtain is far more shocking and terrifying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And before we begin, let me know where you are watching from and what the local time is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Catherine Howard was born around the year 1524 into one of England's most powerful families, yet into a lesser-known branch that did not enjoy the same glory as its more prominent members. Her father, Edmund Howard, was the family's youngest son and never inherited any significant estate, leaving him perpetually in penury. Her mother, Joyce Culpeper, died when Catherine was far too young to retain even a single memory of her face. Within the Howard household there were 9 children in total. Catherine was the youngest, the baby of the brood. Among her elder sisters, some chose the cloistered life of nuns, while others married into minor noble families, trading their dowries for modest titles and lands. From as early as age 5, orphaned of her mother, Catherine was sent to the so-called finishing school of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Agnes Tilney, at Chesworth Manor. There, beneath the vast canopy of ancient oaks, she began her education in Latin letters, learning to read and write according to the classical model, alongside vocal training, harp and viol lessons. Each morning she would don a delicate taffeta gown and step into the candlelit music chamber to practice French vocal exercises, followed by instruction in courtly etiquette, the precise curtsy before dignitaries, the stately posture of greeting, and the art of fluent conversation. That serene environment, soothing yet exacting, left no room for mistakes. Every misstep threatened not only her personal reputation but that of her entire lineage. Despite the family's once great name, Edmund Howard's lack of acumen in managing estates meant he relied heavily on forging advantageous marriages for his daughters as a means of elevating the household's standing. One by one, Catherine's older sisters were wed to minor nobles, their modest marriage portions exchanged for social capital and a measure of security. Catherine herself, slight of frame and round of face, possessed no vast inheritance. Her future hinged entirely upon the pity and patronage of her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, whose influence at court was considerable. The pivotal moment arrived when she was 15 years old, just as King Henry VIII, already notorious for casting aside 2 queens and breaking countless hearts, found himself in need of a new consort following his annulment from Anne of Cleves. Seizing the opportunity to strengthen family ties with the Tudor dynasty, the Duke of Norfolk brought Catherine from Chesworth Manor to serve in the household of the Queen-designate Anne of Cleves. The palace at Oatlands, with its gleaming marble halls and tapestries of crimson and gold, must have seemed both wondrous and daunting to the timid teenager, garbed in silken sleeves and a jewelled girdle. Word of the rose without a thorn, as she was soon whispered about, quickly reached the king's ears. Henry, weary of political matches that left him cold, became enchanted by Catherine's youth and innocence. Her thin taffeta gown shimmered against the damask wall coverings. Her shy smile softened even the stoniest courtier's countenance. Remarkably, within 16 days of formally annulling his marriage to Anne on the 28th of July in 1540, the king summoned Catherine to his side and proclaimed her his new queen, placing on her head a crown heavy with the weight of ambition and peril. Yet behind that dazzling elevation lay months of tension and fear. Though she now bore the title of Queen Consort to Henry VIII, Catherine carried with her the memory of a mother she never truly knew, the echo of that single reprimand in the music room when she was 12 years old, and the lingering dread of having lost control over her own body. Entering the palace, she was not simply a crowned figurehead but a vulnerable girl of not yet 16 summers, thrust into a world where every whisper could spell fortune or ruin. In this first chapter, we glimpse only the opening of her tale. From the oak-shaded halls of the Duchess of Norfolk to the hungry gaze of Henry VIII. From the anxious care for her family's honour to the decisive step onto the perilous stage of Tudor court life. Ahead of Catherine lay an uncertain expanse, and even her brightest dreams would be tinged with the dark promise of sleepless nights before the most dangerous throne in Europe. In the month of March 1539, when she was about 15 years old, Catherine Howard was placed into the household service of Anne of Cleves, the woman who was to become the king's fourth queen. It was her uncle, Thomas Howard, the second Duke of Norfolk, who arranged her transfer from Chesworth Manor to the royal court. In Catherine's mind, this sudden elevation promised security and prestige after all. She would be among ladies of high rank and under the protection of the Queen herself. Yet what seemed a sanctuary soon revealed itself as another gilded snare. That same year, in December of 1539, Catherine met King Henry VIII for the first time at Oatlands Palace. She was still only 15. He was 48, nearly old enough to be her grandfather. Nonetheless, in the candlelit great hall, she carried herself with a gentle poise that caught his attention. The shy curvature of her smile and the bright lustre of her eyes spoke of youth and innocence, qualities that Henry had found wanting in his previous bride. Already wearied by political alliances made and undone, he was entranced by Catherine's fresh vitality, so different from the dour temperament he had encountered in Anne of Cleves. Anne of Cleves had quickly fallen from Henry's favour. The king famously referred to her as that Flanders mare and recoiled at her touch, declaring their marriage an utter disaster. In contrast, Catherine embodied everything that Anne was not. She was English by birth, English by tongue, and innocent as newly fallen snow. Duke Norfolk watched his niece's star rise at court with satisfaction, seeing in her a valuable political pawn and a means to secure his family's influence. He never imagined, however, that the price Catherine might pay for this alliance would be so dire. By the 12th day of July, in the year 1540, Henry formally annulled his marriage to Anne of Cleves. Then, on the 28th day of the same month, he wed Catherine at Oatlands. That very day also witnessed the fall of Thomas Cromwell, once the king's chief minister and the architect of the Cleves match, who was beheaded on Tower Hill. In a grim parallel, Catherine's ascent to the throne coincided with Cromwell's descent into the shadow of the executioner's block. Where Catherine emerged, clothed in silks and crowned in gold, Cromwell lay stripped and bare before the axe. Finally, on the 8th day of August 1540, Catherine Howard was proclaimed Queen at Hampton Court Palace. She was 16 years old at that moment, wearing a crown that weighed more than the monthly stipend of many a courtier. By her side stood the man who had already outlived two queens, a king whose appetite for marriage was matched only by his readiness to discard those who displeased him. Catherine adopted the motto, "No other will but his," words that courtiers praised as a testament to her devotion, but which may well have masked a desperate plea for mercy. In those words, she bound herself entirely to the king's will, surrendering every flicker of personal agency to preserve both her life and her fragile honour. As queen, Catherine strove to fulfil her ceremonial duties with grace. She won the favour of Princess Mary Tudor through patient kindness, offering heartfelt apologies for past slights. To Princess Elizabeth, still a child of about 6, she presented a delicate chain of pearls, strengthening goodwill within the royal family. On various occasions, Catherine interceded with Henry to grant clemency to certain prisoners, following the traditional role of a merciful consort. Even Anne of Cleves, her predecessor turned rival, received gifts and an invitation to the Christmas revels, where Catherine danced alongside her, signalling an attempt to quell court gossip. Through each gesture, Catherine sought to cement her standing and to soften the king's ever-watchful eye with her gentle influence. Yet beneath these outward charms, Catherine's heart trembled with the knowledge that her beauty, her youth, and her eagerness to please had drawn the king's attention only because he sought novelty. In the hush of her private chambers, she must have wondered whether admiration would soon curdle to suspicion, as it had so often for Henry's other wives. For now, however, Catherine remained the rose without a thorn, a fragile blossom in a garden rife with jaded petals and hidden thorns. One small misstep away from a fate as swift and unforgiving as the blade that had fallen upon Cromwell. Nevertheless, Catherine's tainted past continued to trail her like a shadow. In the winter of 1541, Francis Derham, her former secretary and so-called husband, in the naive vows of adolescence, suddenly reappeared at court. He brazenly petitioned for a position within the Queen's household, flaunting the memory of their clandestine liaison as if it were proof of his entitlement. The very rumour of Derham's presence was enough to undermine Catherine's reputation, for in the volatile atmosphere of the Tudor court, a whisper could topple a queen standing overnight. Catherine, who had clung to the protection of her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, now faced the peril of losing Henry's trust. One rumour, one boastful comment from Derham, could cast her from the heights of splendour to the depths of disgrace. At precisely the same moment, Thomas Culpeper, a handsome nobleman favoured by the king, began to intrude upon Catherine's thoughts. Culpeper had long enjoyed Henry's patronage, despite being accused at least once of rape and another time of homicide, charges from which he escaped unpunished thanks to royal favour. Emboldened by his proximity to the monarch, he sent Catherine secret letters, appealing to the intimacy they had shared before her marriage and urging her to grant him further meetings in return for his silence. His missives arrived, concealed within bundles of other dispatches, each one a threat cloaked in entreaty. If she refused to respond to his demands, he would expose her past indiscretions to the king. Thus, Catherine found herself caught between two powerful men, both capable of wrecking her future, with a single accusation, Derham, who might reveal her youthful improprieties, and Culpeper, who could exploit her vulnerability to serve his own ambitions. During the summer progress of 1541, when Henry toured the countryside with a vast retinue of courtiers, the risk to Catherine intensified. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford's sister-in-law to Anne Boleyn, acted as facilitator for secret rendezvous between the Queen and Culpeper. Some historians suggest Jane's motive was compassion, believing she could help Catherine avoid the fate that befell her sister-in-law. Others argue that Jane, ever ambitious and cunning, sought to orchestrate another royal downfall for her own advantage. In any case, the clandestine meetings unfolded in dimly lit chambers of various inns and manor houses, where Catherine, barely 17 at that time, trembled as she addressed a man known to wield power over life and death. Each encounter, disguised as a plea for mercy or a confession of undying fondness, revealed that Catherine had become prey in a ruthless game of influence. Her royal dignity, no defence against the seduction of coercion. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Henry remained preoccupied with trivial concerns: the state of the royal kitchens, the preparations for jousts, and most pressingly, Catherine's health. He fretted over whether she might be with child, ordering daily examinations by his physicians to confirm or deny a pregnancy. He remarked to his council that her cheeks looked too pale, that she seemed fatigued, perhaps ill. Yet he never entertained a single suspicion that the Queen's seeming exhaustion stemmed not from malady but from fear. He trusted in her pure demeanour, in the motto she chose, "No other will but his," as evidence of her unwavering loyalty. His confidence in her innocence blinded him to the perilous truth that her very purity, her naivete, made her powerless to resist the demands and threats of men far more experienced in the arts of manipulation. Thus, Catherine carried the weight of her secret liaisons beneath all the pageantry of court life. Each dance at a masque, each curtsy before a visiting ambassador, each letter she penned in the privacy of her bedchamber was shadowed by dread. She feared both the treacherous tongue of Derham and the relentless passion of Culpeper, neither of which she dared to confront directly. Her days as queen were measured not by the splendour of her coronation, but by the thin line she tread between honour and ruin. And all the while, Henry, lost in his anxieties about her physical well-being, remained oblivious to the tinderbox smouldering at the heart of his marriage. Catherine's purity, so admired by her new husband, had become her greatest vulnerability, a double-edged gift that left her with no means of escape. In the lullaby hush of the royal bedchamber each night, Catherine must have felt the walls closing in, the velvet drapes and golden tapestries offering no sanctuary from her tormentors. Her once bright laughter, likened to the chime of silver bells, had grown hollow, replaced by a desperate stillness, as she awaited the next letter, the next threat, the next moment when her fragile world might shatter entirely. Even in sleep, her dreams would not grant her respite, for the court's corridors echoed not with music, but with the unspoken menace of betrayal. Betrayal by those she once believed would protect her, and betrayal by the very crown she had been chosen to wear. In October of 1541, the court at Hampton Court Palace was suddenly gripped by an unexpected urgency when Archbishop Thomas Cranmer arrived, bearing grave news for King Henry VIII. On a crisp autumn day, the Archbishop presented a confidential dossier detailing Catherine Howard's lost innocence, revealing her past liaisons with Henry Manox and Francis Derham during her childhood and early adolescence. Cranmer's duty compelled him to deliver this explosive information to the king himself, an act that no loyal subject undertook lightly. He left behind a sealed memorandum in Henry's private chapel on the 2nd of November 1541, where only the king and his most trusted advisers might glimpse its contents. Upon reading Cranmer's report, Henry's world was plunged into disquieting doubt. The palace corridors, usually alive with courtly chatter and the clatter of retinues, fell eerily silent as rumours began to swirl. What had seemed a blissful, if politically savvy, marriage now appeared built on a foundation of concealed indiscretions. For the king, who had prided himself on commanding absolute loyalty and unquestioned virtue from those closest to him, the revelation was both shocking and deeply personal. He moved from stunned incredulity to a simmering rage, his trust in the young queen shattered by the very secret she had hoped to bury forever. Just 5 days after Cranmer's memorandum reached his chapel, on the 7th day of November 1541, the palace's gatehouses and guard posts erupted into urgent activity. Lifelike statues and tapestries did little to muffle the footsteps of armed retainers as they stormed Catherine's private apartments. In a moment of pure panic, the queen, still clad in her nightgown, slipped her feet bare onto the cold stone floor and attempted to flee down the long gallery, her cries echoing off the walls. She called out Henry's name, her voice cracking like a frightened child, seeking refuge in a father's arms. Yet the heavy oak doors had already been barred by royal command, and the pursuing guards seized her before she could reach the sanctuary of the king's presence. That very corridor, where Catherine's terrified screams had reverberated through the quiet of early dawn, would come to be known as the Haunted Gallery. Over subsequent centuries, visitors to Hampton Court whispered of faint sobs and the soft padding of bare feet that seemed to drift along the corridor's length at night. Some swore that, when the wind blew just so, it carried a forlorn voice pleading for mercy from a queen who once believed herself invincible. The following morning, on the 8th of November 1541, Catherine was brought before the Privy Council in the Painted Chamber. There, in a solemn, oak-panelled hall lit by flickering candlelight, she faced a circle of stern-faced men, bishops, earls, and privy councillors, who had already been briefed on her secret. These were not gentle interrogators, but the very officials whose duty it was to judge her. For Henry, the betrayal was a bitter metamorphosis. The rose without a thorn he had so adored was now perceived as a poisonous bloom. The tenderness he once felt toward her was replaced by cold reproach, as the council's questions pierced her composure and laid bare every whispered accusation. A scant week later, on the 14th day of November 1541, the formal sentence arrived. Catherine Howard was stripped of her royal titles and banished from court. She was conveyed under guard to Sion Abbey, a remote nunnery near the Tower of London, which served as a state prison for women of high rank. The once celebrated queen now walked the abbey's narrow corridors in simple grey attire, her hair hidden beneath a plain white veil. She had but 8 days in her new confinement, before the writ declaring her no longer queen was formally registered. On the 22nd of November, 1541, Catherine became, in the eyes of English law, a common subject once more. Meanwhile, Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper, the two men whose names were indelibly linked to Catherine's downfall, met a harsher fate. Both were charged with high treason for their part in the Queen's indiscretions, a charge that under Tudor law carried the severest punishment. In early December of 1541, Derham and Culpeper were executed on Tower Hill, their heads severed in a grim spectacle intended to send a stark warning to any who might defy the king's authority. Their skulls were impaled upon spikes atop London Bridge, where the rotting remains greeted travellers and merchants with a lurid display. The sight of their heads, displayed 6 days a week with only Sunday as a brief reprieve, served as a chilling admonition. In the realm of Henry VIII, betrayal of the crown, especially by those closest to it, would be met with uncompromising brutality. Thus, within a matter of weeks, between the 2nd of November and the early days of December 15, 41 Catherine Howard's trajectory had plummeted from royal heights to the shadow of the scaffold. The whisper of her past, once dismissed as the follies of youth, became the instrument of her undoing, and though her own execution would come only months later, the removal of her title and the gruesome fate of her former lovers marked the irrevocable end of her brief, turbulent reign as Queen of England. On the 21st day of January 1542, a solemn Act of Parliament known as the Bill of Attainder was passed against Catherine Howard and her lady-in-waiting, Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford. This grim legislation declared both women guilty of high treason and sentenced them to death. In a particularly harsh clause, King Henry VIII decreed that any future queen consort who concealed a premarital indiscretion would likewise be deemed a traitor. Thus, the statute served not only to condemn Catherine and Jane, but also to place every woman at court under the shadow of suspicion, warning them in no uncertain terms that the crown's favour was as fleeting as January frost. On the 10th day of February 1542, Catherine was escorted under heavy guard onto a royal barge bound for the Tower of London. As the vessel glided beneath London Bridge, she caught sight of the gruesome display of her former lovers' heads, impaled upon spikes and slick with drying blood. Francis Derham's gaunt visage stared down from one spike. Thomas Culpeper's features, once handsome, were distorted by coagulated gore on another. This macabre tableau greeted Catherine as she passed, its horror searing into her memory. In that moment of silent dread, every ripple of the Thames seemed to carry her guilt and shame like so many drifting petals in a poisoned bouquet. 2 days later, on the 13th day of February 1542, Catherine awoke in her damp, cold cell at the Tower. The damp stone walls pressed in upon her, each breath fogging in the frigid air. Summoning what remained of her courage, she asked the guards to bring forward a plank of wood. For hours before dawn, the young queen consort knelt upon the hard flagstones, rehearsing her final speech upon that crude board. She repeated each phrase with trembling lips, professing remorse, acknowledging her offences against God and King, and accepting full responsibility for every misdeed. Each rehearsal was an attempt at perfection, a desperate effort to deliver her words without hesitation or flaw, as though the precise cadence might buy her a moment's mercy. At sunrise, Catherine, still clad in the simple grey gown that marked her house arrest, was led trembling up the narrow steps to Tower Green. Leaning on the arms of 2 guards, she mounted the scaffold with legs too weak to support her weight. Witnesses later described her as pale and quivering, yet determined to speak her prepared confession. In a voice said to be soft but clear, she spoke of her fault and sorrow, concluding with an affirmation that her punishment was just, and that she had wronged both God and monarch. There was a final pause, a breath drawn in acceptance of her fate. Then the executioner's axe fell in a single, swift stroke. With that, Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of Henry VIII, breathed her last. Her body, deprived of any mark of honour, was cast into an unmarked grave beneath the crypt of Street, Peter Advincula Chapel at the Tower. No tombstone bore her name, no prayers were said upon her resting place. The silent pit received her remains as unceremoniously as any common criminal, a final indignity for one who had once worn a queen's crown. Centuries have passed since that freezing morning, yet legend holds that Catherine's spirit lingers still in the corridors of Hampton Court. Visitors tell of footsteps that echo in the haunted gallery, of a pale figure drifting past portraits of Tudor monarchs. Some swear they hear a lament on the wind, a soft plea for a stone to bear her name, a marker to prove that Catherine Howard existed beyond the cruel writ of attainder. In these tales, her restless ghost seeks final rest, yearning at last for the grace of remembrance that eluded her in life. And so, amid the hush of history, Catherine Howard's story remains entwined with caution and compassion, a melancholy lullaby whispered through the ages to those who walk the echoing halls of power. After Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper were executed by beheading in December of 1541, the city of London reeled at the swiftness of royal vengeance. They had faced open trial and public execution on Tower Hill, but Catherine Howard's fate was sealed by a different instrument. The Bill of Attainder, enacted by Parliament on the 21st day of January 1542, this extraordinary statute, bypassing any formal court proceedings, declared the Queen guilty of high treason and condemned her to death. In its text, Henry VIII inserted a chilling proviso. Any future queen who concealed a prior indiscretion would likewise be judged a traitor. Thus, the edict cast a long shadow over the female members of the royal household, warning that even a whisper of past transgression could provoke the king's swift and absolute wrath. On the 10th day of February 1542, Catherine was removed from Sion Abbey under armed guard and conveyed by barge up the Thames to the Tower of London. The chill mist rose from the river's dark waters, wrapping the royal barge in a ghostly haze. As they passed beneath London Bridge, Catherine glimpsed the grisly remnants of her former lovers. Derham's head and Culpeper's were still impaled upon long spikes, their blood congealed in rivulets of black and rust. A murder of crows wheeled overhead, their cries echoing down the stone piers as if mocking her despair. For Catherine, that sight must have cut deeper than any blade, a living tableau of retribution and warning that no barrier of silk or velvet could shield her from the consequences of courtly intrigue. In the small hours of the 13th day of February 1542, Catherine awoke in her cold cell within the White Tower. The damp chill permeated her thin grey gown, and though her limbs trembled with weakness, she summoned the courage to request a simple plank of wood. There, lying upon the rough stone floor, she knelt for hours before dawn, rehearsing her final confession upon that makeshift desk, each phrase acknowledging her failings, expressing contrition to God. Accepting responsibility for her deeds was uttered with such solemn deliberation that the muffled echoes seemed to stir the sleeping guards. In that silent vigil, Catherine displayed the last vestige of her dignity. Even facing the inexorable approach of death, she strove for perfect articulation of her remorse, as if flawless words might temper the severity of her sentence. When morning's pale light crept through the narrow window, the jailers returned to escort her to Tower Green. They found her sinking in exhaustion, the lines of rehearsal etched into her pale cheeks. With stern pity, they supported her shaking frame as she climbed the scaffold steps. Witnesses later recounted how her voice wavered, yet remained resolute as she spoke her prepared words, admitting her transgressions anew and beseeching divine mercy. The crowd, hushed in the chill air, watched as the timber platform carried the fallen queen, once adorned with silken gowns and sparkling jewels, into a final, sober encounter with justice. At the stroke of 9 in the morning, the executioner stepped forward. Catherine knelt upon the block, her head bowed and hands clasped. A hush fell over the assembled crowd, broken only by the distant toll of the tower bell. In a single swift movement, the axe fell, severing her life in an instant. A collective gasp rose from onlookers. The Rose of Tudor Court lay silent, her crown exchanged for a stain of crimson upon the scaffold's boards. Her body was not permitted the honour of a marked resting place. She was carried within the tower precincts to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where an unmarked pit awaited her remains. Labourers heaped earth and quicklime above her, intending to hasten decay and erase every trace of her form. No headstone bore her name, no liturgy marked her passage. In that anonymous grave, Catherine Howard's mortal shell rested alongside men and women of lesser note, a final indignity that reduced a former queen to the status of a common criminal. Centuries would pass, yet whispers of Catherine's story persisted in the echoing halls of Hampton Court. Visitors claimed that on still nights, a pale figure drifted through the haunted gallery, her footsteps light upon the ancient stones. Some spoke of distant sobs, others of a faint plea yearning for a gravestone, for the simple courtesy of remembrance. In the still of midnight, the wind through the gallery's windows may carry a sigh as if from a restless soul. Those who pause by the dimly lit portraits of Tudor monarchs sometimes catch a flicker of movement, the silhouette of a young woman in a grey gown, searching for the proof of her existence. Long after the crowns and speakerships of kings have faded, Catherine Howard's spectre remains a poignant reminder that even those who wear the highest honours can be cast into oblivion by a single misstep, and that the truest measure of mercy lies not in the strength of a ruler's hand but in the grace of memory. In the decades following the extensive restoration of St. Peter ad Vincula Chapel in the 19th century, workmen uncovered a grisly secret beneath its newly laid floor tiles. As they chipped away at the old mortar and lime, they found fragments of human bones scattered across the crypt. Estimates suggest that up to 90 individuals had been interred there over the centuries, including those executed at the Tower for treason and other capital crimes. Among these remains may have lain the bones of Catherine Howard, once Queen of England, but the application of quicklime during earlier periods of demolition and repair had accelerated the decomposition process. As a result, no identifiable skeleton could be attributed to her. Her physical identity, once marked by a crown and royal garments, was effectively erased from the material record. Today, the very chapel floor under which Catherine may rest is covered by modern paving stones, each step a silent reminder of the countless lives, royal and common, that ended in that subterranean space. Visitors to the tower often remark on the unmarked simplicity of street, Peter Advincula, contrasting sharply with the grandeur of the chapel above. Here, in the quiet hush that falls between the dimly lit pews, one can almost imagine the faint outlines of names, long since lost to history. A few paces away, the corridor known as the Haunted Gallery preserves an altogether different kind of memory. This long passageway, once the site of Catherine's desperate flight and anguished screams, carries an atmosphere as chill as the stones themselves. In 1999, security cameras installed for modern surveillance captured a fleeting figure, a young woman dressed in Tudor-era attire that resembled a schoolgirl's tunic. The ghostly apparition darted across the gallery frame before evaporating into the shadows. 3 years later, in 2003, a group of tourists reported seeing a pale figure clawing at the wooden door near the chapel entrance, her hands scratching the panels as though begging for release. Their accounts were recorded in the tower's visitor logs, each description tinged with a combination of fear and fascination. Night shifts at the tower's museum bring their own ledger of unexplained phenomena. After closing hours, docents and guards sometimes hear the unmistakable sound of soft footsteps echoing along the haunted gallery. Accompanying these steps, some claim, is a plaintive voice calling, "My Lord, have mercy," its tone a plaintive echo of a plea for royal pardon. While skeptics suggest these sounds arise from shifting air currents or the settling of iron door frames, the legend of Catherine's restless spirit continues to draw hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. Haunted tours routinely pause at the gallery's midpoint, where guides recount the Queen's final flight and the sorrow that echoed through the empty corridor. A collective shiver often passes through the assembled crowd, heightening the sense that history has not quite released its hold. In 1982, renowned historian Anne Somerset published Elizabeth I, a comprehensive study of the Tudor era where she described Catherine Howard as the tragic emblem of a young woman destroyed by her own title and innocence. Somerset's words underscored the paradox at the heart of Catherine's downfall, that the very qualities which made her appealing to Henry VIII also rendered her powerless within a court defined by suspicion and brutality. Somerset's poignant assessment sparked renewed interest in Catherine's fate, leading to scholarly debates that echoed through archaeological circles. Some experts have advocated for a controlled excavation of the chapel's crypt, arguing that advances in forensic anthropology might one day isolate Catherine's remains from among the 90 or so interred bodies. They propose constructing a proper memorial within street, Peter Advincula Chapel, a modest monument bearing her name and the dates of her brief life from 1524 to 1542 so that future generations might honour her memory. Yet, despite these proposals and the passage of more than 160 years since the 19th century renovations, no formal project has commenced. The chapel floor remains unbroken, its secrets sealed beneath layers of stone and mortar. It seems as though Catherine's legacy, like her physical remains, lies buried under the weight of lingering quicklime and institutional inertia. Still, the story is far from forgotten. Each winter, when the Thames mist infiltrates the tower grounds and the gas lamps flicker in the early dusk, the air around the haunted gallery seems to thicken. Tourists drawn to the history of the Tudor queens linger a moment longer in the chapel vestibule, compelled by the stories of bone fragments and spectral sightings. They peer down the dim passage, half expecting to catch a glimpse of the fallen rose in grey, hunting for a marker to confirm her existence. In the hush that follows closing time, with the tower's ancient walls bathed in moonlight, some say you can still hear a whisper upon the cold wind, a wistful hope for a name inscribed upon stone, for a grave marked with dignity, for the final courtesy of remembrance. Catherine's ghost, it is whispered, has never ceased her search for rest, seeking one small kindness that even a king's decree could never deny, the right to be remembered. In the past decade, a wave of feminist scholarship and historical psychology has led to a profound reappraisal of Catherine Howard's life and downfall. Rather than viewing her simply as a wayward wife who betrayed her king, many modern historians now see her as a victim of grooming and abuse. They emphasize that two older, powerful men, Henry Manox and Francis Derham, had exploited her youth and vulnerability long before she ever met King Henry VIII. By contrast, Catherine herself was held entirely to blame, illustrating the deeply entrenched gender bias in Tudor-era narratives. In this new light, she is not a voluntary traitor, but rather a teenage girl coerced between the rival authorities of the Howard family and the Tudor court. A series of articles published in Gender and History in 2018 laid out a compelling critique of the Bill of Attainder used to condemn Catherine. Scholars pointed out that this extraordinary act of Parliament bypassed any right to a public defence. Whereas Culpeper and Derham faced open trial for high treason, Catherine was punished under a statute more appropriate to charges of adultery, an offence historically applied only to women. This dual standard highlights the harsh double bind facing Tudor women. The same action by a man merited the death penalty as treason, while a woman's sin was denounced as both moral and political failure. By publicly shaming Catherine and setting her fate by decree, the Crown weaponized misogyny, ensuring that any woman at court who erred would be made an example. Recent academic conferences have delved deeply into Catherine's private letters, painstakingly preserved in the State Papers of England. When these personal documents are read in context, certain lines take on new significance. For instance, in a letter to Thomas Culpeper, Catherine wrote, "I die 1,000 deaths," a phrase long interpreted as a flourish of romantic passion. However, historians now argue that these words more likely reflect her terror at being pursued and threatened, rather than any genuine erotic devotion. Similarly, her final correspondence to Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, reveals not a confident plea for clandestine love, but a desperate attempt to negotiate a path to safety. Catherine's repeated efforts to elicit help from Jane suggest she sought escape from a tightening noose, underscoring her role as prey rather than predator. Concurrently, contemporary artists and writers have drawn inspiration from Catherine's tragic story, producing plays, novels, and visual works that emphasize her agency and suffering. One notable example is the stage drama The White Rose of Hampton Court, first performed in 2020. This play reconstructs the Queen's final hours, portraying her not as a foolish adolescent, but as a courageous young woman, wielding her words as weapons in a fight for dignity. Audiences watch Catherine kneel before her makeshift desk, rehearsing her valedictory speech, each line delivered with growing resolve. The drama's poignant depiction of her isolation, no royal advisors, no sympathetic ear, echoes the modern reassessment. Catherine was not culpable in the sense of a willing conspirator, but rather a figure caught in a maelstrom of power dynamics that left her no safe harbour. This artistic and scholarly renaissance has also prompted renewed interest in memorialization. Some literary critics have argued that Catherine's portrayal as a white rose signifies her purity under siege, recalling the emblem of the Yorkist cause, even as she served a Tudor king. Others note that her narrative resonates with 21st century dialogues about consent, autonomy, and the exploitation of minors, drawing a direct line between past and present. In workshops and seminars, participants discuss how Catherine's story parallels modern understandings of grooming, that abusers manipulate trust, exploit power imbalances, and shift blame onto their victims. Moreover, Catherine's plight has become a focal point for discussions of restorative justice in academic circles. Debates have emerged about whether a formal apology or symbolic memorial might offer some measure of redress. While a plaque in the Tower's chapel acknowledges her name, many contend that a more prominent monument, perhaps in the grounds of Hampton Court Palace, could serve as a tangible testament to her ordeal and survival. Such a memorial, proponents argue, would counteract the centuries-long erasure of her identity and affirm her humanity beyond Tudor propaganda. Yet, the most enduring legacy of this recent reappraisal is perhaps the way it reframes Catherine Howard's voice. No longer merely an object of royal whimsy or scandalous anecdote, she emerges as a tragic figure whose words, her letters, speeches, and even her final confession bear witness to her struggle. By listening anew to those fragile, carefully composed sentences, we gain insight into a teenager's terror and resilience. In the hush of late-night study rooms and the quiet corners of libraries, Scholars and students trace the arc of her life not as a cautionary tale about female virtue, but as a reminder of what can happen when power goes unchecked. In this era of renewed attention to voices once silenced by history, Catherine Howard stands among those whose stories demand a second hearing. Through feminist critique, psychological insight, and creative expression, the narrative of the fifth wife of Henry VIII has transformed from a footnote of royal scandal into a symbol of resistance against systems that exploit and erase. And as each new article, performance, or memorial proposal takes shape, it carries forward the hope that Catherine's legacy will endure not merely as a spectre in the haunted gallery, but as a living call to recognize and protect the vulnerable souls who walk, or once walked, among us. Haunting reverberations from Catherine Howard's downfall extended far beyond her personal tragedy, sparking a broader debate over the absolute authority of Henry VIII. In the wake of Catherine's execution, Henry moved to codify his response in royal legislation. A new clause was inserted into the Marriage Act of 1542, stipulating that any future queen consort who concealed a premarital indiscretion would be deemed guilty of high treason. This harsh amendment transformed royal marriages into instruments of total surveillance over women's private lives. Henceforth, any prospective queen knew that her past, however distant, would be scrutinized and could cost her life. Marriages at court, once alliances of power and diplomacy, became exercises in perpetual oversight, as though every gown and jewelled pendant must be justified under the glaring scrutiny of Tudor law. In the year 1543, Henry wedded his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, choosing her from among several noble hopefuls. Unlike her predecessor, Catherine Parr understood the perilous lessons of courtly favour. She artfully maintained distance between herself and any hint of romantic scandal, cultivating a reputation for erudition and piety rather than physical allure. Having survived her own precarious upbringing, she emphasized scripture and scholarly debate over flirtation, engaging Henry in theological discussions that appealed to his enduring vanity and self-image as defender of faith. Where Catherine Howard had been enthralled by the king's attention, Catherine Parr sought to enthrall his mind. By presenting herself as more innocent than a maid yet grown, Parr set a new standard. A queen consort must project an air of untouchable virtue, even surpassing the traditional concept of maidenly chastity, in order to preserve her life and status at court. Catherine Howard's case also left its mark on the Tudor judicial system. The use of bills of attainder surged in the 1540s, applied not only to nobles but also to commoners accused of various forms of disloyalty. These parliamentary decrees bypassed standard legal procedures: no jury, no public defence, no judicial trial relying solely on the king's prerogative. The result was a doctrine of ambiguous crimes. As long as royal command affirmed an offence, the accused could be stripped of liberty and life with a single stroke of legislative ink. From 1541 through 1546, historians tally more than 30 bills of attainder enacted under Henry's reign, each reinforcing the message that absolute obedience was the only safeguard against arbitrary execution. In this climate of uncertainty, even a fleeting rumour could become the basis for a death sentence. Amid these sweeping changes, Catherine Howard stands out as perhaps the most tragic exemplar of Tudor power's excess. She embodied the perilous combination of youthful trust in sovereign mercy and the presumed right of royalty to demand transparency from women alone. Her story reveals the cruel irony that the very innocence admired by Henry VIII became the pretext for her undoing. While her bright demeanour once captivated the court, her past indiscretions, fostered by men who wielded authority, were weaponized to frame her as a traitor. She was punished not just for her actions, but for being a vessel upon which rival powers could project their anxieties about lineage, loyalty, and female agency. In the dim corridors of Hampton Court and the echoing galleries of the Tower, Catherine's memory persists as a cautionary lullaby. Her life and death encapsulate the Tudor paradox. Under a monarch who fancied himself both a lover and a judge, a queen's purest virtues could become her greatest vulnerabilities. She was the girl who dared to smile at the king, and in that smile found both her briefest triumph and her final downfall. In the hushed hush that follows the court's revelries, one might still hear a faint whisper of her lament, a reminder that absolute power, wielded without mercy or recourse, leaves no room for innocence to survive. In the year 2025, exactly 5 centuries after Catherine Howard took her final breath, Her story resonates not only in the pages of history books but also within modern forums, advocating for women's rights and against abuse of power. Across the United Kingdom and beyond, women's organisations have rallied to erect an official memorial at the Tower of London, invoking Catherine's memory as a powerful emblem of a minor adolescent woman who was crushed by male authority and entrenched prejudices. Petitions have gathered tens of thousands of signatures online, while local councils have debated proposals for a modest plaque near the Chapel of Street. Peter Advincula, inscribed with Catherine's name and the dates of her birth and death, 1524 to 1542, so that passers-by might pause and reflect upon her tragic plight. Journalist Emma Harrison, writing for the London Observer in March of 2025, observed, "Catherine Howard was far more than a queen silenced too soon. She stands as an eternal warning about the abuse of power, the shaming of victims, and the systematic denial of women's fundamental human rights." Harrison's commentary has been shared widely on social media platforms, sparking conversations about how many other young women through the ages have had their voices extinguished, buried under layers of lime and legal decree, never to be granted even the courtesy of a marked grave. Harrison's words serve as a reminder that historical injustice reverberates through the present, inviting each generation to confront the mechanisms of oppression that once felled a teenager reaching for protection beneath a crown. Tonight's Haunted Hampton Court tour, a popular evening event drawing hundreds per week, makes a deliberate pause in the corridor known as the Haunted Gallery. Guides, their lanterns held low, ask visitors to close their eyes and imagine Catherine's desperate footsteps echoing along the cold stones, her panicked cries for mercy bouncing off the walls. "Here," they whisper, "was the path she ran in the early hours of the 8th of November 1541, fleeing from guards who came to arrest her." Picture a fleeting figure in a grey nightgown, pressed against your shoulder, seeking refuge that never came. The tourists shiver involuntarily as the air grows chill, and more than a few recite softly, "My Lord, have mercy," as though they have borrowed Catherine's own voice. In this retelling, the young queen becomes a living presence once more, a sweet poison, as one guide describes, because the allure of royal favour turned fatal. She runs, unseen yet felt in the recesses of memory, still awaiting an apology from Henry VIII, a king long since dust and a headstone bearing her name. Many who walk the gallery at dusk claim to sense a sorrowful turn of the head or an invisible hand brushing theirs in fleeting contact. Whether these sensations arise from the stones themselves or from the collective power of imagination, they serve to keep Catherine's spirit alive in the minds of those who listen. Though Catherine Howard never reached her 18th birthday, her life has endured as a whispered testament across centuries. Her brief tenure as queen, and her ignominious end, remind us that the act of bearing witness of recounting her story, with exactness and empathy, possesses the power to awaken justice that has long slumbered. For every petition filed, every lantern lit in the gallery, every article published, we restore a fragment of Catherine's erased identity. In doing so, we affirm that memory itself is a form of reparation, more potent than any legislative decree. Ultimately, Catherine Howard's legacy offers a lullaby of hard-won insight, that when we reclaim the name of someone who was cast into oblivion, we enact the truest form of compassion. And only by granting her the dignity of remembrance, by affirming the unconditional right to life and to be heard, can we learn the authentic lessons she urgently sought to impart, that empathy, accountability, and respect for every human being transcend the brittle trappings of power and privilege. As the last lantern's glow fades in the haunted gallery, her echo remains, urging us to make space in our hearts for those whose stories were once denied, and to offer them, at last, the final courtesy of a name restored to history. Immediately following the tragic death of Catherine Howard on the 13th day of February 1542, the courts of Europe were shaken by the severity of Henry VIII's retribution. News of the Queen's execution spread swiftly across diplomatic channels. Ambassadors in London dispatched urgent dispatches to their home governments, describing how a king could summon the head of the woman he had once loved to the scaffold within a matter of months. In Paris, the French ambassador noted not only the sorrow of losing Henry's fifth wife, but also the pervasive fear that had settled among the English nobility. Courtiers in London found themselves speaking in hushed tones, wary that a careless remark might draw unwelcome attention. No corner of courtly life seemed immune from anxious glances and muffled conversations, as though the memory of Catherine's fate hung over every banquet table and audience chamber. Within England itself, the atmosphere grew palpably tense. Ladies-in-waiting, guards and senior officials found their every action subject to stricter scrutiny. The Bill of Attainder that condemned Catherine had set a precedent. No trial, no public hearing, only a royal edict required to pronounce guilt and sentence. As the decade of the 1540s unfolded, Parliament passed more than 30 of these attainder statutes, making them a routine tool for eliminating real or perceived threats. Commoners and dukes alike learned that any improper liaison, even rumoured, could result in sudden arrest and forfeiture of property. For those who once dreamed of catching the king's favour or rising by royal marriage, Catherine's downfall served as a grim lesson. A single misstep, a stray whisper of past impropriety, might lead to the scaffold as swiftly as it had done for the fallen queen. Henry himself, though outwardly satisfied with the dispensation of justice, became increasingly obsessed with the purity of his remaining consort, Catherine Parr. Every sunrise brought fresh memoranda delivered in ciphered letters, detailing rumours of indiscretion among the courtiers. He erected private tents where physicians conducted intimate examinations of the queen, ensuring either her pregnancy or her continued virginity. A secret corps of informants was dispatched through the palace's hidden passages to collect hearsay and petty scandal. What had once been a matter of affection and alliance transformed into a terrifying crusade for royal chastity. In this chilling environment, any woman who aroused suspicion, no matter how tangentially, risked becoming prey in Henry's relentless hunt for betrayal. The Howard family, long celebrated for its dukes and earls, suffered grievously in the aftermath. Several prominent Howards were stripped of their offices. Some were imprisoned in the Tower, while others fled into exile to avoid disgrace. The once celebrated lineage, which had furnished generations of military commanders and counsellors, found its reputation tarnished by association with a queen who had lost not only her head, but also her family's favour. It was not until the final years of Elizabeth I's reign, some 60 years after Catherine's downfall, that the Howard name began to regain its former standing. Nonetheless, the stain of the wife who lost her head remained a cautionary epithet, whispered among descendants and servants alike, a reminder that even a storied house could fall under the weight of scandal. Beyond the noble echelons, Catherine's fate reverberated through London's taverns and alleyways. Street corner raconteurs spun brief ballads about the gentle princess, betrayed by a monarch's whims, printed on cheap broadsheets sold along the banks of the Thames. Patrons of the notorious Mermaid Tavern would solemnly toast her memory. Some claimed that even the city's homeless wept for Catherine, moved by the cruelty of her end. Folk musicians composed sombre ballads, recounting her midnight flight through candlelit galleries, their mournful refrains illustrating how a queen's final footsteps had echoed off stone walls, haunting observers for generations. These oral traditions, impartial to royal censorship, passed hand to hand, ensuring that Catherine's story survived in the simple power of song and spoken word. Such events inaugurated what historians now term England's Age of Fear. In the years that followed, any play, poem, or painting depicting court life underwent rigorous review by the Privy Council. Scripts that hinted at royal misconduct were censored or banned outright. Dramatists learned to conceal political commentary beneath allegory or to rely on mythic settings rather than the Tudor court. Ironically, the more official art was suppressed, the more potent became the underground legends. At twilight, when lanterns flickered in deserted theatres, actors would improvise scenes of ghostly queens and silent galleries, thinly veiled nods to Catherine's plight. Audiences, riveted by the blend of historical illusion and supernatural suggestion, left the playhouse with chills playing at the nape of their necks. Through Catherine Howard's death, a chilling precedent was set. Absolute royal authority, unchecked by public trial or appeal, could nullify any woman's autonomy. Her tale of youthful trust betrayed, of ruthless punishment, and of a family's fall from grace became the dark cornerstone of a culture that equated female chastity with political loyalty. In the hush of night, across the silent stones of Hampton Court and the shadowed chambers of the Tower, her memory endures as a lingering testament. In a realm where allegiance was measured by virtue, the cost of a single rumour could be higher than any crown. Over the course of more than 5 centuries, Catherine Howard's story has attracted scholars from diverse disciplines, each reshaping our understanding of her life and fate. In the late 19th century, British historians largely framed Catherine as a political pawn in the power struggles between the Howard family and the Tudor court. Works published during that period emphasised the role of Thomas Howard, the second Duke of Norfolk, in steering his niece into the royal marriage. According to these accounts, the Duke prioritised the family's honour and influence over Catherine's well-being, viewing her as a resource to be sacrificed on the chessboard of dynastic politics. Academic journals of the time, such as the English Historical Review, contain numerous articles underscoring how Catherine's marriage served Norfolk's strategy to cement Howard ascendancy, though few regretted her tragic end. By the early 20th century, feminist voices began to challenge this traditional narrative. Suffragists and women's rights advocates drew attention to the gendered double standard that condemned Catherine far more harshly than her male counterparts. In the 1970s and 80s, articles in History Today and the Journal of Women's History argued that the use of a bill of attainder to execute Catherine without a public trial epitomized a legal weapon deployed disproportionately against women. These scholars pointed out that while Thomas Culpeper and Francis Derham faced treason charges and public executions, Catherine's crime was labelled adultery, an offence historically prosecuted only against women. The critiques highlighted how Tudor law and propaganda constructed a narrative that blamed Catherine entirely, even though state investigators and the king's own insiders had obscured or suppressed evidence of coercion and manipulation. In the 21st century, an interdisciplinary approach has emerged, blending political history, anthropology, and psychology to analyse Catherine's experiences of grooming and loss of agency. Researchers have delved into royal medical records, private correspondence, physician diaries, and even genetic studies of period artifacts to recreate the conditions of her life at court. One notable project, The Pale Rose of England, 2012, employed advanced imaging techniques to scan surviving lacquered garments from Hampton Court Palace. By reconstructing the fabric and construction of Catherine's attire, the study revealed the physical constraints she endured, corsets so tight they left bruises, and layered petticoats that exacerbated her physical vulnerability after months of clandestine pregnancies or infections. These tangible reconstructions underscored how Catherine's body bore the marks of both regal expectation and personal trauma. Simultaneously, the scholarly monograph, Shadowed by the Crown, 2018, situated Catherine within the ideological framework of the Tudor court. Its author argued that the palace operated as a fear factory, systematically training women to become chastity chess pieces for political manoeuvring. Any queen or noblewoman who failed this role, whether through real or alleged misconduct, faced execution to serve as a deterrent for the population at large. In this interpretation, Catherine was neither frivolous nor immoral, but rather a poignant symbol of the collision between feminine identity and monarchical control. Her fall from grace demonstrated the brutal mechanism by which the crown enforced conformity and projected power through fear. Modern research has also re-examined the figure of Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, who arranged Catherine's secret meetings with Culpeper. Earlier accounts painted Jane as a loyal companion. Contemporary scholarship has recast her as a dual-edged presence. Some historians propose that Jane risked everything to aid her stepniece, fearing the fate she herself had suffered after Anne Boleyn's fall. Others suggest Jane harboured lingering resentment from Anne's execution and may have seen Catherine's vulnerability as an opportunity for retribution. This nuanced portrayal reveals the Tudor court as a complex psychological web, where each individual royal or servant navigated personal loyalties, ambitions, and vendettas. Jane's dual role as protector and possible provocateur exemplifies the intricate interpersonal dynamics that shaped Catherine's destiny. Through these evolving scholarly lenses, Catherine Howard has emerged not as a simplistic cautionary tale of youthful folly, but as a multifaceted figure whose life and death illuminate broader themes of power, gender, and legal authority. From late 19th century political analyses to 20th century feminist critiques and 21st century interdisciplinary reconstructions, each generation of researchers has peeled back another layer of Tudor history to reveal the human cost of a court built on absolute monarchical rule. In reflecting upon Catherine's story, we confront enduring questions about autonomy, consent, and the mechanisms by which institutions control female bodies. Her legacy, refracted through the prisms of changing academic paradigms, continues to resonate as a testament to the resilience of those whose voices were once silenced, and as a challenge to ensure that no one else's narrative is erased beneath the weight of power. In the realm of popular culture, the tragic figure of Catherine Howard has inspired an array of adaptations across film, literature, theatre, and graphic art, each striving to capture facets of her short, tumultuous life. The British television drama, The White Queen, first broadcast in 2013, devoted its final episode to Catherine's story. There, she is portrayed with wide, innocent eyes and a languid smile that hints at both vulnerability and defiance. Yet many viewers and critics noted that the series, while lush in costume and setting, fell short of conveying the deep psychological scars documented in historical records. The fleeting glimpse of Catherine's inner turmoil, her fear, her hope, her moments of bravery, remained largely unexplored amid the broader narrative of dynastic conflict. Several historical novels have since endeavoured to fill that gap, focusing on Catherine as a groomed adolescent rather than a mere footnote in royal chronicles. Susan Nagel's The Sixth Wife, published in 2001, reconstructs Catherine's childhood at Chesworth Manor with painstaking detail. Nagel describes the oak-panelled halls and verdant gardens where the young Catherine learned music and manners, only to discover that her education masked a darker curriculum. The cultivation of a reputation to be bartered in the marriage market. Anya Seton's Catherine. The Virgin Wife, released in 2005, further explores Catherine's emotional landscape, portraying her loneliness after her mother's death and her yearning for genuine affection. Seton's prose immerses readers in Catherine's internal struggle caught between duty to her family and the terror of the hollow promises of courtly life. Through these pages, modern audiences gain empathy for a teenager whose shy laughter concealed deep-seated anxiety. In visual arts, the American painter Kim Meyer unveiled her oil-on-canvas series, Rows of Wolves, in 2019. Across 8 brooding compositions, Meyer casts Catherine in Baroque frames where golden light slices through impenetrable shadows. One painting depicts her alone in a vast chamber, a single candle illuminating a pale dress strewn with rose petals that have lost their petals. The juxtaposition of opulent surroundings and wilted blooms serves as a powerful metaphor for Catherine's torn existence. At once cherished as queen and sacrificed as prey, viewers encounter a visceral tension in Meyer's work, sensing in every glowing ember the cost of innocence betrayed. Meanwhile, in April of 2022, the venerable British children's magazine Beano published a historical comic strip retelling Catherine's tale for younger readers. Rendered in a slightly exaggerated cartoon style, the strip nevertheless does not shy away from the Queen's more harrowing moments. Panels show Catherine, cloaked in a grey nightgown, sprinting through the cold, torchlit corridors of Hampton Court, the very haunted gallery where her screams once echoed. The speech bubbles capture her terror. Please, mercy. Readers witness, in stylized yet chilling detail, how a teenage girl became entangled with Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper, depicted as menacing silhouettes lurking in shadow. This bold adaptation introduces a new generation to Catherine's plight, employing vivid imagery to illustrate a narrative often confined to academic tomes. On the stage at Shakespeare's Globe, Catherine's life has likewise found dramatic expression. In 2021, the theatre premiered The Broken Crown, a play focusing on the Queen's final dawn. Under inverted spotlights that cast long, distorted shadows across the wooden floorboards, each step Catherine takes toward the scaffold is imbued with heavy symbolism. The actress carrying the role, the 27-year-old Elizabeth Carr, prepared for the part by studying Tudor posture and dialect, blending fragility with steely resolve. As Carr ascends the scaffold, the audience falls into a reverent hush. When the executioner's axe strikes, a single, resonant echo rings through the open-air theatre. The moment is heart-stopping. A mute testament to Catherine's last act of courage, speaking through silence and movement rather than words. These varied retellings on screen, in print, on canvas, in panels, and on stage, affirm that Catherine Howard's story transcends its 16th century origins. Each medium highlights different dimensions of her experience. The political intrigue of the White Queen, the intimate perspective of historical novels, the symbolic power of Kim Meyer's paintings, the accessible immediacy of Beano's comic, and the emotional gravity of Shakespeare's Globe. Together, they weave a tapestry that honors the complexity of a queen who was, above all, a vulnerable young woman caught in the merciless gears of power. And as the candles dim on each performance, and the last pages are turned, Catherine's voice, once silenced by decree, continues to resonate with audiences yearning to understand the human cost of history. The spectral lore surrounding Catherine Howard has proved to be far more than mere entertainment. It has become a driving force in attracting visitors to Hampton Court Palace and the Tower of London. Organised nighttime tours emphasise the haunted gallery, the very corridor where Catherine is said to have fled in her grey nightgown, her desperate cries echoing off the cold stone walls. Guides encourage participants to imagine the pale figure racing past flickering torchlight, recounting her frantic footsteps on the morning of the 8th of November, 1541. Many attendees later attest to faint whispers, the softest echo of a distant scream, or sudden flickers of light in the darkened passage, lending credence to the tale of a queen who remains unrestful even centuries after her death. Each autumn, the Tower hosts Nightmare Live on Halloween, a live-action reenactment that has grown in popularity since its inception in 2018. Actors recreate Catherine's heart-pounding flight. The lead performer, costumed as an 18-year-old queen, clutches her night robe about her shoulders and dashes barefoot along a raised platform designed to mimic the gallery's flagstones. Surround sound speakers play the rapid thud of running footsteps, a chorus of panicked gasps, and the howl of wind through iron-grated windows. Audience members sometimes startle so violently that they leap from their seats. A handful have even left in mid-performance, unable to shake the visceral chill that permeates the theatre. In 2023, the immersive role-playing game Tudor's Revenge took Catherine's story into the digital realm. Players assume the role of the young queen navigating an ever-darkening court. The objective: avoid the predatory advances of Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper, while gathering scattered documents, secret letters, physicians' notes, and coded missives to clear Catherine's name. The game's designers drew upon documented floor plans of Hampton Court, rendering its labyrinthine corridors in inky shadows and muted candlelight. Occasionally, the Emperor's silhouette drifts across a crimson curtain at the screen's edge, accompanied by a low, ominous hum. With over 1 million copies sold within its first 6 months, Tudor's Revenge demonstrates the enduring fascination with Catherine's tragic narrative and the desire to rewrite her fate through interactive storytelling. Meanwhile, history museums have embraced Catherine's story through tangible artifacts and experiential exhibits. Fragments of courtly silks, believed to be from her personal wardrobe, are displayed under soft lighting, their fine weave and faded embroidery evoking the sumptuous yet perilous world she inhabited. A replica of one of Catherine's forged letters to Culpeper is presented alongside annotated translations, spotlighting the tension between presumed romantic longing and coercive threat. Perhaps most evocatively, a full-scale model of the haunted gallery invites visitors to don period footwear and tread its narrow planks. Here, a guide pauses to recount Catherine's final flight, the hush punctuated by a sudden gust of air through a concealed vent, as if her spirit still sighs through those stones. In the digital sphere, the virtual Catherine Museum offers a fully interactive archive of documents, artwork, and scholarly commentary. Launched in 2020, the museum's online portal compiles high-resolution scans of Tudor-era manuscripts, detailed renderings of Meyer's Rows of Wolves series, and clips from Globe Theatre productions such as The Broken Crown. Users can explore three-dimensional reconstructions of Hampton Court's opulent chambers, pausing to read primary source annotations about Catherine's daily rituals, her morning devotions, her gown fittings, her private supplications for mercy. This virtual space has registered over 200,000 unique visitors since its debut, testifying to the appetite for accessible, nuanced engagement with Catherine's legacy. Across physical tours, live performances, immersive gaming, museum exhibitions, and digital archives, Catherine Howard's story has transcended the confines of traditional history. What began as whispered rumor in a gilded corridor has evolved into a multi-sensory tapestry that engages millions worldwide. Yet beneath every candle's flicker and every pixel's glow lies the same core narrative: a young woman's desperate struggle for agency, exploited by powerful men, and ultimately silenced by a monarch's decree. In revisiting chambers and screens, in tracing the outlines of her silk bodice or listening for her phantom footsteps, modern audiences partake in an act of collective remembrance. Through these varied mediums, Catherine's voice, once stifled by courtly politics and legal edict, finds resonance anew. Each retelling, whether in whispered tours of shadowy galleries or the digital depths of an online museum, honors the complexity of her experience. And as visitors step into her world barefoot on cold stone, controller in hand, or candlelight dancing across museum walls, they carry forward the story of a queen whose final legacy is not the crown she wore, but the echoes of her footsteps that continue to haunt history's corridors. And so, as we draw the curtains on Catherine Howard's story, let us settle into the quiet comfort of this moment, breathing in the gentleness of a world softened by time. Imagine that final corridor bathed in moonlight, its once sharp angles now mellowed by the hush of centuries. The stones beneath your feet no longer cold but warm, with the passage of countless dreams. There is no urgency here, only the slow exhale of history, inviting you to release whatever worries you carry and to rest in the knowledge that her tale, though steeped in sorrow, has become a beacon for compassion. As the echoes of her footsteps fade into silence, remember that Catherine's journey teaches us the importance of empathy, of honoring those whose voices have been lost to the whirlwind of power. Her life reminds us that every person, no matter how vulnerable or overlooked, deserves to be heard, to be seen, and to be treated with kindness. In the soft glow of this reflection, let go of any final image you might hold of her fear or her flight, and allow instead a vision of peace, a gentle rose unfurling at dawn, petals opening slowly to the promise of understanding and forgiveness. Carry forward the message that emerged from her shadowed halls, that true strength lies not in wielding authority over others, but in offering shelter to the wounded, in choosing mercy over judgment, and in safeguarding the dignity of every soul. In the silence that follows, you may feel the threads of connection stretching from her distant past into your own present, weaving a tapestry of shared humanity that spans centuries and borders. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your mind drifts toward the realm of dreams, let the soft rhythm of your breath guide you into a place of calm. If ever you wake to the whisper of fear or uncertainty, recall the gentle admonition of Catherine's legacy, to listen, to remember, and to stand with those who need our care. Sleep well, dear listener. May your dreams be filled with light, with echoes of kindness, and with the gentle assurance that you are never alone in your journey. And if you find yourself stirred by tonight's tale, do join us again. Subscribe to our channel for more whispered stories that soothe the spirit and illuminate the heart. Until next time, good night and sweet dreams.